Welcome, everybody, to UFO Man Live, episode 11. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Triangle over by Japan. I want to introduce the panel tonight, and tonight we're kind of slim on the panel. We got myself, I'm UFO Man, and to my right, we have Tommy Highway, an esteemed author and ufologist, newly ufologist, and a researcher. And we're just trying to bring the truth to everyone out there and just chit chat about maybe a subject that's been overly researched, but not necessarily solved. So, the first part of our evening is going to be directed by Tommy Highway. So take it away, Tommy.
All right, folks. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming back as always. Hope we do a good one for you this evening. Again, like Tim was saying, we're actually going to be talking about the Bermuda Triangle and as well as the Dragon's Triangle. Now, what makes these two regions of our planet somewhat unique is that it's not that we have to investigate whether or not strange things are happening there. We already know this, okay? We know this because it's written throughout our history, human history. I mean, you could even go back to Christopher Columbus. Back in 1492, on the night of October 11th, Christopher Columbus and crew of the Santa Maria reported a sighting of an unknown light just days before the landing in whatever that island is. But my point being is that not only did that happen, and they think that probably the first sighting that they had was actually a meteor, Christopher Columbus then also reported a red light on the horizon. And this is back in 1492. And there are all kinds of examples all through the 1800s of strange occurrences, okay? Ships disappearing, and then later on aircraft disappearing, strange whirlpools forming, odd weather patterns, all kinds of things of that nature. And it's become such an enigma that it's, like Tim said, it's part of our science now. This has been studied extensively for the last decades at this point. And the reason we don't study things unless there's something to study. You follow
Exactly.
me? Yeah, there's no reason to spend the money and the time and all of that unless people think that there's really something to all of this.
So, Tommy, what is your opinion of the Mary Celeste?
Oops. As the story goes, the Mary Celeste had been lost and then sighted several times over a period of time. It had even been boarded. And what they discovered when they boarded the ship was that it wasn't leaking. It was completely seaworthy. They actually still had plenty of food and supplies in the hold. They still had wine on board. They still had their cargo. Everything was intact, except there were no people. Now, why would that be? Well, imagine if you're on a ship in the ocean, middle of the ocean, and let's just say a major squall or storm popped up, which happens in this area quite often. Okay, and you're talking about seas of 10 to 15 feet, the waves, that kind of thing, going like this. Now, are you going to stay on a ship that is perfectly intact, or for whatever reason, are you going to take your family, because the captain had his family on board and the rest of his crew, and jump into the lifeboat, which is basically nothing but a rowboat at this period of time, and then brave the waves in the rowboat? It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense why, a captain of a ship would leave a perfectly good ship. And over the years, it had been boarded several times, supposedly, and they'd even found some gold on board. One of the stories, and this was told by several members of another ship, I forget the name of the ship, but that they'd actually found gold on board, but before they could actually retrieve it, that the Mary Celeste disappeared into some kind of a weird fog.
Right.
And that story's been around forever. So, that's what gets me about this. Why leave a perfectly good ship? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
There's even been a movie made about it called The Lost Voyage, about a ship carrying gold that disappears into a fog. So if you want to see a entertaining film concerning what Tommy is talking about, it's called The Lost Voyage, and it is on YouTube. I heard that this ship, the Cotopaxi, was found recently in open water and had been missing for over 90 years, but there was no one on board. Where are all the bodies?
There are no bodies found on board. I mean, if those people had died on board, there'd be skeletons, there'd be some sort of remnants of human remains there. And the fact that there wasn't any present, I mean, that is just so unusual.
Right.
I mean, where did they go and why did they leave? Again, why leave a perfectly sound ship in the middle of the ocean?
For a rowboat.
Right. I just can't.
Almost spell certain death in high waves.
Oh, sure.
Now,
Maybe
sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's a theory that maybe a rogue wave washed them off the main deck, but that doesn't account for the crew that were down below deck, or maybe, down in the storage galley or in the cook's galley. What happened to them? There was no bodies on board, no skeletons, no dead animals, nothing. When the ship was found, it was pristine.
Right.
I mean, it was old and rusted, but it was pristine in the sense that it was clean of any living or organic matter.
Exactly.
So where did they go?
Plus, you've got the unexplained end of the ship's log like that. He ended his sentence with the word "and." I mean, he must have tore out of his office pretty quick there, I would think, because that's something that would be done in haste. I mean, a captain wouldn't finish his log statement. I don't know. That just seems odd to me.
He may have felt that he was in some type of emergency situation, just didn't have time to finish his log. So I can see that happening. But in regards to why there's no evidence of anything indicating that there were people on board other than the food on the tables, the food in the larder, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just weird. I've always thought that with the floating ships, the ones that were found still floating with the people missing, that the people had to have experienced some type of paranormal event, some type of maybe a time slip or a time jump, like the Philadelphia experiment,
possibly,
or maybe a portal of some kind. They went into a fog. Maybe they went through time and were removed from the craft, and then the ship was brought back into our time, and there was nobody on it. Just, it's kind of far-fetched, but it's a theory I've been thinking about.
Could have been some form of madness for whatever reason that took over the crew, and they felt that they needed to leave the ship for some odd reason. I mean, there's just so many possibilities, and that's what makes it such an interesting mystery. Is that this is one of those that we've got evidence, but the evidence doesn't take us anywhere, at least anywhere close to solving the mystery.
JDR in the chat was saying that the engineer should have been in the engine room.
That's right.
Yes, we agree. Where was he? He wasn't there. What about the other crewmen that worked down below?
Nobody was asleep down there. I mean,
nobody was asleep. Nobody in their bunks. Nothing. They were all completely missing.
Yep.
And the ship was still traveling on the ocean.
Yeah. Perfectly intact.
Perfectly intact. It may have been rusted and a derelict, but it was still intact enough to keep its buoyancy and float.
Right.
So it's very difficult to understand. So science has been trying to explain that away by saying that the people were washed overboard by a rogue wave, or like Tommy was suggesting, maybe they left the ship on their own accord. That seems kind of hard to believe that they would do that. In regards to a rogue wave, yeah, that would account for maybe some of the people on board, but it wouldn't account for the engineer in the engineer room, like JDR in the chat said.
Right.
And it wouldn't account for people that were down below sleeping or working in the galley. JDR, was the food missing? No, the food wasn't missing. The food was still there.
Right.
So that wasn't washed away. And according to what I understand, food on tables on the main level was still there.
Mhm.
So it couldn't have been a rogue wave like everybody is saying, because that would have washed that right off the table.
Stephen Rocks just mentioned in the chat that I would think that the captain would keep that logbook with him no matter what. Well, that's a great point. You know, I mean, he didn't, when he left that room, when he left that logbook, for whatever reason, he never came back. At least that's the way it looks to me. So that's a great point.
They say, what is not true, Survivor Girl, that the ship went missing. The ship did go missing, and it did come back with no people on board. That's been proven.
Yeah, I think there are some reports out there she may be referring to that it's like fake news or whatever, but this is actually a known story. This story's been around for probably all my life.
Yeah, if not longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in regards to the food still being on the main level, the rogue wave theory that science has proposed is inaccurate, because, like I said, you throw water on a table, you're going to wash whatever's on that table right off the table.
Mm-hmm.
And the food and the beverages in the cups were still on the table. Yeah, that's what the reports had claimed. So in that regard, it's unexplained as to how they disappeared, and there is no scientific explanation in regards to the floating ships that are still traveling on the water. The ones that sunk, there are explanations, but in regards to the ones that are still floating, there's no way to prove where the people went.
Right. You know, in my opinion, and just take it as that, any event on the ocean that would have produced enough water to literally blow everybody off of that ship would have taken that ship down.
Yes.
You know, really.
Or tipped it over.
Right.
And then made it sink.
Right.
And no wreckage has been found, correct, Tommy?
Well, no.
The Mary Celeste?
The Mary Celeste, no. That I don't think there was ever any wreckage found, anything like that.
Because it was still floating.
Right. And they were the Mary Celeste. There's a lot of stories of it popping up in places in front of military ships and all that, and even being boarded, you know, and all of a sudden just whoosh, it just disappears into a fog, and it was some weird fog bank. And that's happened. And again, that's just not a one-off thing. I mean, this is something that's happened several times over the years. So
Tracy, the other ship was called the, let's see, it was the Mary Celeste and the Cotopaxi. Cotopaxi. And that was in the Bermuda Triangle. Later on, when we talk about the Dragon's Triangle, you'll hear about some other ships. But yes, there's been hundreds of craft that have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle, from what I understand. And there's also been airplanes that have gone missing.
Since 1945, the Bermuda Triangle has been directly blamed for the deaths of 917 souls.
Wow.
Now we're talking about air disappearances or crashes. We're talking about incidents on sea. But this is, I mean, we're even talking. This isn't something that happened, 50 years ago. This is happening now. I mean, there's incidences of 2015. We've had 33 people die. I think that was that cargo ship in the storm. And there's another one here, doesn't say what it is, but 2 people were presumed dead or missing on that one. And this is 2015. So, you know, this kind of thing, it's been going on for a very long time. And, you know, people will come up with a lot of theories that there could be some sort of gas displacement doing this, which I understand you're going to talk about later. That's a good theory. But gas displacement on the water doesn't really, I don't know, to me, when you're talking about aircraft and aircraft disappearances and things like that, that's what, you know, how do you do that? Now, the other thing that's always been a constant, and when we're talking about stories from the Bermuda Triangle, is navigation and radio problems. Okay. I'm talking about compasses spinning, radios not working correctly, things of that nature. We've even heard of small planes going into a cloud bank and coming out, and have flown hundreds of miles, even though they'd only been in that cloud bank for, a matter of minutes. Okay. There are those stories. But the one that we'll talk about next, this is the one, in my personal opinion, is the most intriguing one of them all. And that is the mystery of Flight 19. Now, Flight 19 was a squadron of, they were torpedo bombers, and they were flying out of Fort Lauderdale. Now, they were on basically just a routine mission. They were doing navigation, exercises and things of that nature.
So, Tommy, do you believe that Flight 19, the Lost Patrol, all those crewmen disappeared in the Triangle? And if so, why?
But because they were overdue and presumed lost or whatever, the U.S. military actually sent out one of those amphibious rescue planes that they had back in the day. And those guys, the top of the line navigation systems on board, those guys know what they're doing. And so did the pilots of Flight 19, by the way. But this rescue plane also came up missing. Now, here's what I think is so interesting about this. Flight 19, the last radio communication so they say, is they reported that they were over an island chain. Okay. Now you have to understand about the planes of this era. These things were designed to fly hundreds of miles, not thousands of miles. So they've only got a certain radius that they could possibly be in, right? Under normal circumstances. So let's assume the only island chain that around there that they could have actually been flying over would have been the Florida Keys. Now, what's interesting about this is, and I know it's a big ass ocean out there, I get that, but you've got all 5 of these aircraft that supposedly went down somewhere in the vicinity of the most scuba dived area in the hemisphere. Okay, they also test those buoys, those side scanning buoys. They actually test those in those waters, and they found all kinds of stuff, but they've never found so much as a shred of evidence indicating what happened to Flight 19 or that rescue plane that went after them.
I have a theory about that. I was thinking that these areas, the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Triangle per se, are called vile vortices, which means areas that are extremely high in electromagnetic frequency. So when these planes fly overhead over the Bermuda Triangle, per se, their instruments back in the day in the 40s and the 30s got messed up by the electromagnetic frequency. So they didn't know, they couldn't fly by their instruments, which is what they were taught to do. They had to fly by line of sight. But then when freak weather happened over the triangle, like fog or a typhoon or whatever, and they entered into this freak weather, they lost track of where they were going. And because they could only fly hundreds of miles with their fuel, they flew perhaps out into the ocean and didn't realize where they were. And when the fog and the weather cleared, they couldn't figure out where they were, and they went down into the ocean. And because people weren't looking for them where they went down, they were never found. That's just a theory.
They did report on the radio communications that they were all having compass trouble. Now, I could see if one or two planes maybe had compass trouble, just mechanical failure, whatever, wear and tear, but all of them. And again, these guys are skilled operators. They know how to navigate, with no features, no landmarks or any of that. These guys knew what they were doing.
Right.
And, it just, and again, they reported being over a chain of islands. And the only thing that I can figure that they actually could have been flying over, and this is a pretty common theory with the military, are the Florida Keys.
Right.
Because there is no other island chain in the area. Not that they could have, made it to. So,
unless, of course, now there is a story about a gentleman. This is modern day. There is a story about a gentleman that was flying a twin-seater Cessna.
Yep.
And he had enough fuel to go 300 miles, say. Okay. And he was going to travel this 300 miles in like, I don't know, a couple hours.
Mhm.
And he was up in the air right after takeoff, and he saw this weird cloud formation. And he flew into it. And when he flew into it, it seemed like he traveled 300 miles in a matter of minutes,
Mhm.
which is impossible for his type of aircraft.
Without expending any fuel to speak of.
Right, without expending any extra fuel. Exactly. So what I'm going to say to you is this: the possibility of those aircraft, Flight 19, maybe flying into something like that and actually traveling much farther distance than they had fuel for could possibly be a very good possibility. And if that's the case, then that would make sense as to why they didn't recognize the island chain. Because, like you said, they were knowledgeable of their area.
Yep.
They would have been knowledgeable about the U.S. coastline.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they were U.S. pilots. So if they're over a whole bunch of islands that they didn't recognize, then it was somewhere else on the planet that they weren't familiar with.
Right.
So how did they get there? They had to have gone through some type of accelerated portal to get there.
Some kind of a wormhole.
Yeah,
a distortion or something.
or a portal or something like that.
Right.
A time
Sure.
slip or something like
Sure.
that. Yeah.
The gentleman that you're talking about, he was actually even questioned by the FAA because of his flight plan.
Right.
I mean, they were like, "How the hell did you do this?" And he's like, "I don't know." You know, and then that's how the story got out. That's when he told him about the magnetic fog and all that business. And yeah, so I mean, this really happened.
It was a legitimate,
Yeah.
actually a legitimate deal here.
Yep.
If they check the rotation of certain planets and at which times they were over that spot, it could be a pattern. Yes, Tracy, that is true. That is true.
Possibility.
I know that the old-time mariners would do that. And I think even now they do that as well. Sometimes when they're traveling out at sea, they'll check the planets and where they're located in the sky and whatnot to know where they are.
It's what the sextant's for.
Right, the sextant, right. I can honestly say that wouldn't help if you went through a portal. I don't think pilots use a sextant, though.
No.
They fly by their gauges, and when their gauges are gone, they have to fly by line of sight.
Right.
And these pilots back in World War II, just after World War II, were flying by line of sight a lot.
Yeah, and they were probably better navigators than we have now, truth be told.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, a magnetic pull. Yeah, well, the magnetic pull would have been the electromagnetic frequencies messing up their aircraft. And that might have interrupted their electronics and caused their engines to quit. Then they would go into a dive. And if they hit the ocean and the ocean had that gas that was coming up from the ocean bottom, forming like a giant gas bubble, then the plane wouldn't have had any buoyancy and it would have gone straight down to the bottom. But the question I have is this: if that were to have happened, okay, where's the aircraft? Where's the proof? Where is the people or the crew that crewed that plane? They have never found the crew of the plane. They have found planes like it in the ocean, but not Flight 19.
Right.
They found other crashed jets of the same area, not jets, planes of the same era, but they're not Flight 19.
Nope.
Flight 19 has never been found.
Serial numbers have never been found, never been recovered.
Never.
And again, we're talking about, if you're talking from Fort Lauderdale to, again, the Florida Keys in that area, that is a very, very heavily traveled area. And like I say, I mean, it's been scuba dived by everybody and his brother. And there's been every kind of military exercise in those areas, and it's not particularly deep there. Right. So, where are those? Where are 5, 6 aircraft? Where are they? Why can't we find these things?
Right. The Vortexes like the Dragon's Triangle, for instance, has a definite increase in electromagnetic waves. These waves have been known to interfere with even modern aircraft. That's why the Dragon's Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle are flown around by military aircraft. They are not flown over. This is because they do not want to have difficulty with their very expensive electronic systems. Even what appeared to be a floating UFO was found inside the triangle. There was a lady that was found floating in this weird shaped vehicle. I have a picture of that vehicle, and I'm going to bring it up here. Let's see here. This is the picture of the vehicle and a picture of her. Okay, this vehicle supposedly resembled what the Japanese said was like an incense burner, but it was tremendously large and it was capable of holding at least one, maybe two people. This
escape
was
pod.
Right. It was buoyant and it was floating on top of the ocean. This is what was found. That's why they think it was an extraterrestrial event. Okay, let me see how I can get that off there. All right. Here's another image of what they thought it may have looked like right there. And the lady had a box. The box had a language in it that could not be deciphered by anyone in the region. So this was tallied up as most likely a definite extraterrestrial event from the Dragon's Triangle. Okay, Kublai Khan. This is Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan, the world conqueror, the man who tried to conquer the world. Kublai Khan tried to invade Japan twice. The first time in 1254 and the second time in 1259. In 1254, he took 20,000 troops and 100 ships, and they were all lost in the Dragon's Triangle due to a typhoon. The second time in 1259, he took 100 ships and another 20,000 troops, and they were lost. What I'd like to know is, if they were lost, how did he get back? That's what I always wondered. But obviously, one of the ships must have gotten back with him. But he tried twice to cross the ocean through the Dragon's Triangle to get to Japan, and it just didn't pan out. So in regards to the Dragon's Triangle and in regards to the Bermuda Triangle, there's a lot of congruency. They are very comparable. This is the Dragon's Triangle. This is where it's located by Japan. The Japanese used to believe in the fable that there were dragons underneath the water dragging ships down into the triangle. And what it actually was volcanic eruptions underneath the water, rumbling underneath the water, which appeared to be a roaring sound to the Japanese sailors. And it was reported in their logs as if it were dragons. And the fire that they saw wasn't dragon fire, but it was magma. Okay. Here's one of the ships that was found floating in the Dragon's Triangle. No crew on board, completely empty of any crew. Food was still there, everything. This is more of a modern ship. It disappeared in the 40s. and they found it again in like the 60s. That ancient UFO, this is a modern representation of what that girl was sitting in. This right here. And it is referred to as a USO because it was seen popping out of the water and taking off into the sky. This is just a representation. It's not the real picture. But if you look, you could see there is some, it is comparable to the ancient image. And here's the modern representation. Okay, let's see here now. I want to go out of there. Okay, Tommy. So what do you think of the Dragon's Triangle?
Well, it's another one of those regions where all kinds of unexplained phenomenon happen, and we've heard of countless ships being, like you said, being lost there. The methane displacement theory, the gas displacement theory, that may hold water, no pun intended. That may hold some water. I mean, I could see that it could be a way that you would lose all buoyancy, and if that happens, like you said, you'll drop like a rock. You might as well be falling from the sky. That could be it as well, but I'll tell you what I don't like. I've never liked this. I've never liked when anything had vanished without a trace. Okay, because
Right.
even
Right.
when a ship goes down, there's always going to be lighter stuff that float to the top. Aircraft is another example. If a civilian jetliner hits the water, there's always like seats and insulation, things like that are a debris field, that something's tangible. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
And the fact that we're not seeing that in many of these cases, it's just it's bizarre. To say that it's bizarre really doesn't quite cut it. I mean, it's something more than that.
I do believe that. I believe that it's definitely more than that because, like I said, where are the people?
Right.
Where is the evidence? Where's the proof?
Mhm.
Science goes down. All right, we had somebody recently go down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Can't remember who it was, but I do know that we had some deep sea explorers go down to the bottom of the ocean. Okay. But they didn't find any ships down there at the Marianas Trench either. So, what I'm wondering is if these ships are going down due to the methane gas release, okay, and they're hitting the bottom of the ocean, how are they disappearing without any trace? How are the people and the metals and everything on board just disappearing? Is the ocean becoming acidic and eating it all away, or is the volcanic reaction at the bottom of the sea, is that causing some type of meltdown of the organic matter? I don't know, but there isn't a lot of physical proof to prove that science has got it right.
Right. Think of it like this. Imagine if you were an alien species and you wanted to operate on someone else's planet without them being able to A, really know about it, or B, be able to do anything about it. Okay. So since we can go pretty much anywhere on the surface of the planet now, I mean, we can even hit the South Pole. It's not easy, but we can get there. What about if you were an alien? Where would you want to be? How about a place where the humans can't go? And we have some real deep oceans where we simply cannot go. I mean, there's just nothing we can do. There could be an entire civilization down there in some of the deepest parts of the ocean. We would never know it because we just can't get there. That's just one theory.
And where we can get, we haven't found anything.
Right.
And with our solar sonar equipment, our drone-like sonar equipment that can go very, very deep, but not to the bottom of the ocean,
right,
but pretty darn close, has not found the missing aircraft of Flight 19, nor have they found anything conclusive about the ships that have gone missing, according to their names on their sides or their identification numbers in the logs. They just have not been found. The other thing I want to say is, even with current and how things can move around the globe, you would still eventually find something.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And they have not found anything. I mean, look at Amelia Earhart. What did they find? They said they found some plane remnants on this one island. Okay. And then they put a statue up to commemorate Amelia Earhart on that island. But who's to say that that plane was really Amelia Earhart's? It may have been another plane, and they just said it was hers to give all of us people closure. Kind of like flight MH370, which is more recently. And Tommy, you and I were talking about that earlier. Yep. MH370 went missing, and everybody was saying, oh, it vanished without a trace. Well, yes, it did vanish without a trace, but where did it go? And how did it vanish without a trace? Was it shot down? Well, it couldn't have been shot down because there was no debris on the ocean. There was no, and it was flying over the ocean. There was no debris.
And they looked big time.
Yeah, they had a big search pattern going on. Both United States Air Force, United States Navy,
Australians, everybody was on this.
Everybody was on
it.
And
other countries.
They looked for a long time, and they could not find anything. So the point is, when they came up with some wreckage, like what was it, a year, a little bit over a year after the actual disappearance, my feeling is that they just came up with some wreckage from another aircraft that was identical to the MH370 plane and said, hey, look, we found some wreckage. So now you can have closure and know that, yeah, it crashed, we found the plane. But they didn't come out and say, hey, we have the matching numbers, we have the black box, we have everything. They didn't say that. They just said, hey, we got part of a wing.
Yeah. What they have, you could put in the back of a pickup truck easily.
So who knows? Maybe it's been faked. So what you've been told about the Bermuda Triangle and what you've been told about the Dragon's Triangle may or may not actually be the full truth. Maybe they're trying to hide things from us so that we don't know the truth. You know,
they do it with virtually everything else. So why not the Bermuda Triangle?
You know, there is a theory that there are things known as portals around the Earth, and these vile vortices that have high electromagnetic frequency disturbances could be causing these time windows, kind of like what that one pilot with the Cessna twin-seater went through. Perhaps that's what's happening to some of these ships. They go through a time window, and wherever they end up, they leave the ship for some reason. And then when the ship comes back, there's nobody on board, but everything else is still there. That could be a theory. It's a little far-fetched, but it's possible.
Sure.
Without concrete evidence, definitive proof, there is no way to prove anything,
right?
Including science. I mean, physics is physics, yes. Science is science, yes. But when it comes down to facts, you've got to have evidence. It's just the way things are.
Sure.
Let's go to the chat room, Tommy, and see what they got to say.
Sure. You know, the thing that gets me about, especially like, let's go back to Flight 19. You know, you have to understand that, I mean, you can go online right now and you can look at photos of aircraft that have been underwater since, the Second World War, and they're still intact. I mean, they look like an aircraft. I mean, that aircraft aluminum, it's not going anywhere. So wherever if Flight 19 and the rescue craft are in fact on the bottom of the ocean, then wherever they are, they're still there. I mean, they still probably resemble aircraft at this point. In fact, I'm sure they do. Anything that's not rubber or leather is probably still there.
Right.
So where are they?
Yeah. Who knows? That's the thing.
Mhm.
Wasn't there a ship recently that was missing for like, I don't know, 70, 80 years, and it just popped out of the blue, and they found it outside the U.S. in coastal waters? I can't remember the name
Not
of
sure.
it, but military destroyers came across it, and it had been missing for quite some time, and they identified it, but it was recently. So for a ship to last that long, I mean, with weather and salt water and all that to pummel the ship and destroy the metals and whatnot, you would think it wouldn't last 90 years on the sea.
Plus, I mean, it's not like it's turning itself into the waves and all the things that you would have to do to be able to navigate big storm surge like that.
Right.
I mean,
so
it's
what's
just
doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Tony said, I saw a real UFO when I was in the Army. Okay, Tony, what type of UFO did you see? Okay, well, I saw some UFOs as well, and that's why we're digging into a lot of different subjects. We just thought that tonight we would go off subject of UFOs for a little bit, just because we need to branch out and look into other unproven mysteries, so to speak. I do have a Facebook channel called The Dark Portal. And on The Dark Portal, we talk about, see, there's the mug. We talk about everything and anything odd and strange, especially things like the Bermuda Triangle and the UFOs and the paranormal and
any unexplained phenomenon.
Any unexplained phenomena, cryptids, anything, chimeras, anything. So if you're interested, come on over to Facebook and check it out. Okay. Let's see here. I think what I'm going to do is read a couple things here. I have something here. It's called 25 little known facts about the Dragon's Triangle, and you need to hear this. Contrary to what you know, the Bermuda Triangle is not the only location that's been deemed as dangerous by both sailors and pilots. The Dragon's Triangle is a stretch of the sea just off the coast of Japan that has collected a myriad of stories, myths, and seemingly many legends throughout the years. Given the area's turbulent history when it comes to disappearances and strange phenomenon, it can be often challenging to separate the myth from the fact. Amidst various studies done up until the 1950s, scientists gathered plenty of information, but have no definitive reason for why this area in particular sees so much action, and even more so than the Bermuda Triangle. Fortunately, we do have scientific proof of why certain anomalies happen, which is helping in figuring out how to avoid future tragedies. There may never be a direct cause that is nailed down for why so many have set off and met their demise before returning, but we do have a hint of what goes on in these mysterious waters. Many have speculated, but only some theories have been hailed as proof positive. It's easy to imagine how many stories have been told about this watery graveyard, and it's our job to separate the legitimate from the ones that are better off saving for a fiction novel. Hold on here. Okay. The Devil's Triangle is very close to Tokyo, Japan. It's surprising to note that the Dragon's Triangle is only 100 kilometers away from Tokyo, which is, of course, a major city. The closest landmass to it is Miyake, which is a small island off the coast of Japan. However, since the exact beginning and end of this triangle has never been really established, there is no knowing for sure where it sits. Some claim that the triangle is within close proximity to Iwo Jima as well, which would explain why a volcanic activity is at the root of many stories. It goes by the Pacific Bermuda Triangle as well. That's another name it's called. As you read earlier, both this triangle and the one found in the Atlantic go hand in hand as far as casualties and mysterious disappearances. While the Dragon's Triangle may not have as much popularity as the one more duly noted on the opposite side of the world, it's no less daunting or dangerous. In fact, the Devil's Sea has a history just as long, if not longer, than its Atlantic counterpart, making it just as much a part of nature's biggest mysteries. And that's insinuating that the Dragon's Triangle has had reports of ships going missing for centuries, whereas Bermuda's Triangle has only been studied for about the last 100, 120 years in documented history. The Dragon's Triangle has earned it the term vile vortex. Why? Well, this is not the only vile vortex in the world. In fact, there are 12 in total that were given these titles by a Scottish biologist named T. Sanderson. He noted that these vortices happen to fall in areas with electromagnetic anomalies that were much higher and happened in much more frequent rates than the rest of the world. He was also able to draw a pattern between these sites, connected them in somewhat of a diamond grid. Each of these locations has an influx of mixed water temperatures that cause their electromagnetic phenomena. Japan, let's see here, notable maritime events date all the way back to 1274 AD and 1254 AD. Japan was to be invaded several times during the 1200s. And two of those attempts were by Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan and were foiled via none other than the Dragon's Triangle. Due to awful conditions, the sea claimed the lives of 40,000 crew members. They also lost their ships in the process, and both were due to seemingly unnatural typhoons in the area. Any further attempts were halted after the realization that these seas were in fact merciless to those who traveled them. So even back in the 1200s, they marked off that area as very dangerous and to be avoided. Okay, then there was a ship called the Maru, the infamous research ship sent out by Japan to explore the legends about this unexplained body of water. During their investigation, one of their missions was to unearth what had happened to the previous ships that Japan had recently lost in this triangle. In 1952, they set out to sea, but unfortunately never returned. The crew consisted of 31 members, and sadly, none of them were ever found, even though the shipwreck was discovered shortly after. It's unclear what brought the ship down in the first place. Okay. Volcanic activity has been noted there. In going back to the point about Iwo Jima, the question of volcanic activity has been posed in regard to the strange events that happened in the Devil's Sea. Underwater volcanoes, also known as subsea volcanoes, are capable of spewing lava out above the ocean surface. They can also be responsible for a significant increase in seismic activity which would wreak havoc on the water above. This could potentially cause rogue waves that some have reported and could attribute to the strange legends that told about dragons. Currents may have something to do with the ship's peril as well. The constant influx of both hot and cold water could potentially explain certain phenomena that have been witnessed in the triangle. Biologist Ivan Sanderson was the first to hypothesize that these changes in the sea temperatures could lead to electromagnetic disturbances. This would essentially limit a ship's travel, and if it were to become caught between these two currents, their compasses and their navigation equipment could become compromised. While there is no definitive proof of this, it's likely the cause for many disappearances that were previously unexplained. Methane gas could cause volatile underwater activity. Now, this is what I wanted to bring up. There are plenty of occurrences that happen under the ocean surfaces that we may not necessarily be aware of until it's too late. Methane gas forms in large quantities on the seabed, referred to as methane hydrates. When these crystal-like structures eventually explode and are released, they float to the top as bubbles and sit on the surface. This causes changes in buoyancy and has been known to sink a ship without leaving any trace or evidence. Imagine blowing bubbles through a straw into a glass of water. This is the effect methane has on the surface. So, in regards to ships going down instantaneously when they hit these gas bubbles, yes, I can see it happening. Not all the time necessarily, because I think, like Tommy said, all the temperatures of the water, the currents, and the methane bubbles being there have to all be there at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that will not happen every single time.
Kind of a little miracle has to happen, really.
Right. In Japan has lost plenty of their own ships to this area in particular. In the 1940s through the 1950s, Japan launched several ships that had plotted a course through the Dragon's Triangle. These ships never returned to Japan and had seemingly vanished without a trace. These ships were lost along with fishing boats and eventually prompted the investigation by the Maru No. 5, which we already know never returned and had joined the fate of the other ships. This was an enormous loss to Japan, and that would eventually be the last effort ever put forth to discover what really happened. So, Japan's government decided to deem the area unsafe. After the decade of lost ships, the disappearance of the Maru No. 5 crew was the last straw for Japan. They decided that no more lives would be lost in an effort to investigate this unexplained string of events and deemed the area completely unsafe and would not allow their ships to travel there. They also said it was too dangerous for transport as well as sailing, and efficiently ended all their efforts to explore the area. Any investigations that were still open were immediately closed, their work halted to prevent any other ships from falling to the same fate. Okay, well, Stephen Rocks in the chat says, I spent a lot of time in the desert and found 3 crashed planes in a 100-mile area. It does happen.
And that's amazing that he's found 3. That's amazing. But whether they're wrecks that were already discovered or not, I mean, there's a bunch of military wrecks all through the desert that you can go to. They're actually right by Area 51. There's one. It was an F4, I believe, and they left the fuselage. And this is another thing too. You know, these planes are fighter planes, okay? And when they go on the ground, you think that when you see the explosion, all that, there's nothing left. Okay, and a lot of these planes, when they ditch the plane or whatever, the plane's going well over 600 miles an hour when it hits the ground, and there's fuselage, there's wreckage. 9/11 is just one of those points I have to make out.
Okay, well, I have a question for you then. This kind of ties into our discussion tonight concerning the Bermuda Triangle and the Devil's Triangle, or the Dragon's Triangle, because there have been ships that have been sunk by methane bubbles
I've heard
coming
of that.
off the ocean bottom due to the water temperature reaching 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And they have to reach that temperature for it to form a gas bubble large enough to swallow a ship and bring it down to the bottom.
Well, imagine this, okay? You have blue whales. You have all these whales that are swimming around, just whales alone, okay?
Right.
How much do you think they crap? A lot, okay?
Oh,
And
sure.
then they're in open water that goes 12 to 20,000 feet down. And they're just one aspect of things. There's so much life in the ocean, okay? The crapping. All this stuff goes down on the bottom of the ocean floor and sits there. And ferments or whatever it does. I don't know how cold the temperatures are or warm because, you know,
Right.
sometimes when you get to the bottom of the ocean, it's very warm because there's mantle there. And so you have all this crap. And then what does crap do? It forms methane. Okay?
Right.
And so the methane naturally comes from life in the ocean because there's so much life.
Right.
Okay. And however those bubbles are kept down there, there's so much pressure involved and so many dynamics with the ocean that you could get, there's no doubt in my mind that there could be disruptions that create all kinds of what they call rogue waves. And a rogue wave, I mean, I've been told that they've had ones that they've reported that were over 500 feet tall. And if you're out there in a ship, okay, and a 500-foot wave comes, it could definitely sink the largest tankers. I mean, that's a humongous wave. And I saw, you know, there's some video of this where either in storms and they're really busy and then they have a big rogue wave. But I'm talking about calm seas. There's like calm seas, and next thing you know, you see a breaker coming over and it swamps the ship. So there, I mean, there's these rogue waves could be coming from air bubbles or gas bubbles. Methane would then be a disruption of water and wave action, I believe. That's how it would probably swamp the ship. The gas itself isn't going to do anything. It's just that when it comes up with such force that it forces the water to move and displaces the water. And if it were to be a large amount, it could be a mile thick, half a mile.
According to science, the water loses its buoyancy.
Well, think about this, though. If a gas bubble that was a half a mile thick came up, it could lower the water around it a half a mile, okay?
Right.
You're talking about a wave that's 2,500 feet tall, or a depression 2,500 feet tall. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And really, you're talking miles and miles and miles deep of water. You know, the trench is 6-7 miles. A quarter of a mile is not that far. Okay, that you could have gas in it. That you could have gas that's pulled up from volcanic activity, from any number of things, because gas is coming from the inside of the earth.
Right.
So if you can imagine having to displace miles of gas, that's a. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that. I mean,
right. I wouldn't want to be in that either, but I do have a question about that. Even though we have the gas displacement and we have the huge waves and whatnot, what about the ships that are still afloat that have no people on them? Where do the people go?
Okay, that could be. You know, there's weird things, okay, that occur out into the sea. If you've ever been on the ocean, I've been on the ocean. Once you get out in the ocean and you don't see land anymore, you have no idea where you're going unless you have navigational skills.
Right.
It's like being in a desert that has no markings, no nothing. It's teeming with life. That'll and half of it down there will eat you. Okay, you know. So it's like,
right.
So, okay. Depends on the ship. There's ships that have open. They're open. The people are out on the decks and they're open ships. You know what I'm saying? And a wave could easily wash everyone off the ship. I've been on in very rough conditions where I literally was crawling around on the deck, and if I stood up, I could have been thrown off the ship deck. And you tie yourself onto shit, because if you don't, you could be thrown away from the boat, and they won't even know you're fucking off the boat. By the time they know you're off the boat, you know what I mean? It could be that people got confused. We need more information, as far as.
Well, this is the problem with some stories, okay? Some stories indicate that the food that they were eating, their plates, their dinnerware, everything was still on the table.
Yeah, that's what I'm at.
Even cups with beverages in them.
Right.
And this was on an open deck. So if they
But
were
that
missing,
could be pirates. Okay, piracy is still a big thing.
But the cargo is always in the hold. That's the thing. They didn't steal the
That's
cargo.
is that when they're exchanging the ship or they're taking over the ship, something could happen. Okay, they're in the middle of taking these people hostage, and they're on a smaller boat, and the boat gets engulfed with water, or they get too many people on the boat, or whatever, or they're throwing people off the boat.
well, yeah, that's a possibility.
It's hard to say because you're dealing with speculation. Okay, I mean, what was the weather condition like? What are the circumstances? Was there any traces of any kind of chemical that can make people go crazy? Ergot, for instance. Okay, ergot can grow on any kind of rye stuff or whatever, prairie rye, whatever. If that gets in the air, and you get
It
ergot
makes
poisoning,
people hallucinate.
yeah, it's like taking LSD, like 10, 20 hits of LSD, and ergot is, because ergot is what they make LSD out. So
In fact, that's how the witch trials started.
But there's other things out there in the ocean that could cause madness. There's been where they said mermaids were out there. There are a lot of different kinds of phenomenon that could happen. I mean, the ocean, 2/3 of the world is the ocean, and we know nothing about it. Okay, we really don't. And when you get down to the bottom of the ocean, it's so hard for us to do anything because of the pressure and all that. We have to have such specialized equipment. We don't know shit. I mean, and when you talk about these rogue waves, they had a landslide, okay, that happened in Alaska, and they have it on film. There's a YouTube where you can watch the guy that actually survived it on the boat when the freaking wave hits him, and this wave is like 1,000 feet high. That happens from this landslide, and most of the people, anybody on the shore, anywhere near the shore, got killed because when the wave came up on the shore, it just washed and killed everybody. But the guy was able to ride this wave out. It's so awesome. The video, it gives me goosebumps, but it's just incredible, to think. But most of the people don't survive these because if you get hit sideways or whatever, and you have a wave that big, it throws the boat down and puts so much water on top of it that the vortexes that are involved with that much displacement of water, it can suck you to the bottom. You know what I mean?
Okay, that still doesn't answer how airplanes disappear over the triangles.
Well, that's another thing that you have to understand is that when you're flying over the ocean, depends on weather conditions. You know what I mean? Completely weather conditions.
Right.
You're dealing with a flat plane, right, with currents, and you have air currents and you have water currents, and those water currents are incredibly powerful. They drive the weather, okay, and the wind and everything else is, you know what I mean? You have hurricanes, so many different things that, once again, you have to kind of analyze the whole picture. Now, if they just disappear and they have no contact with these people, pilots make mistakes. People make mistakes. They get disoriented. It's so easy to get disoriented in a plane. If something happens to your instruments and it's nighttime, it's dark, you can easily fly it into the ground, not even know it. And the water out there, it's unforgiving. It's an ocean. And if it's 10,000 feet deep, that plane's on the bottom, it's gone. It's literally gone. You know what I mean? I know they have the mapping now. That's pretty amazing. But there was a time where they could even tell if it was down anything more than 1,000 feet. They didn't even know where the Titanic sank for years and years and years, for Christ's sakes. And that was a massive, huge ship. They knew the area it was, but they didn't know exactly where it was until, they had the sonar and stuff that was able to do it. So, I mean, we're going to find a lot more as our technology increases. They're going to find a lot of these wrecks because a lot of them are perfectly preserved sitting on the bottom. Yeah, I mean, they found a whole bunch of planes. Now, I think they found the squadron that disappeared in World War II.
They found planes just like Flight 19.
Right.
But the numbers did not match to the planes of Flight 19. So Flight 19 is
still.
Well,
I'm talking about there was two different squadrons. There's a search and rescue squadron that disappeared too.
Yes.
Right.
That's probably the one you're talking about.
Well, they did find what were they? They were like World War II fighters. There was 3 of them, and they all were within. They ran out of gas. This is what happened. They ran out of gas and they ditched. And they were somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle area, or whatever. They did find those planes just recently. I don't know. I forget what they were designated, but there's been several military training things that have disappeared there, and I think is what happens is that there's winds out there, okay, and they get traveling in a wind, they get too far away from where they're at, and they try to turn around, and they're going into a headwind, and they're using a ton of fuel, a lot more fuel than they thought. And back then, prop planes were really subjected to altitudes, you know what I mean? And the more higher you could get, the less fuel you'd use on one hand, but then the planes were piston-driven engines, they weren't jet engines, so they were really limited. So the drag components and everything else, the dynamics of flying a prop plane to a jet is totally different. See, the jet age, you know, if they lose a jet plane out there under these circumstances, I would be a lot more, you know, wondering what was going on, because the prop planes, like I said, you know, you could get flying too low and run out of fuel real easily, or have a fuel leak or have something wrong. Those planes were subjected to issues, and you're out over water. You know, those planes were designed to land anywhere on land because they had issues with them. You know, I mean, like biplanes all the time. You'd see them landing on in the old days on a fucking road, and they'd pull up to a gas station. They ran around pump gas, you know, because that's how the pump gas was back in those days. But they were designed to land wherever. Whereas, you know what I mean, and they were flying very slow. Now, when you have the kinds of planes we have today, obviously, you know, it'd be very dangerous to land them on a road or whatever. But it is another question. They could be, but they're designed totally differently. They're designed to be able to travel over water, you know, and stuff. Where, like, remember Lindbergh did it. It was an incredible feat in his day, and that wasn't that long ago when he did that. I mean, it was like 1920s, right? So we're only been able to cross the Atlantic, you know, with a plane on that for less than 100 years now. You know, still less than 100 years ago. 100 years ago, they couldn't fly anywhere out there. They had accidents all the time. They had people disappearing. They didn't have navigational equipment. They had fucking compasses and stuff that weren't anything like today. There was a lot of stuff that could have flawed and everything else. And see, people turn everything into a conspiracy when it's actually, like, a lot of the Bermuda Triangle is the fact that it's very shallow. It has a ton of coral, and that coral will cut through like thick steel, like a freaking knife through butter. It's nasty shit. If you've ever been swimming or surfing and landed anywhere near coral and got cut up, you know what I'm talking about.
Coral is very dangerous. Yeah.
And that whole area is a giant coral bed, and there's these currents that, depending on the tides, can take like a ship that does not have power. And in the old days, they didn't have power. They were all clipper ships, and just destroy them because they would get caught where they didn't want to be.
But there'd be wreckage.
Yeah, the wreckage would be, depending on how bad the current is, and the bottom is being all coral, cut it up and break it up into pieces. And being that it's so dangerous, who wants to dive down around that shit? You know, I mean, if you have a current like that, trying to dive around there, you know, I mean.
What I'm getting at is some of the wreckage would have come up to the
surface. They found a lot of wreckage down there. They found a lot of wreckage down around. And one place in particular, they call it like the Boneyard or whatever. And this was a place where it's kind of narrow, and that you can't see the coral, but it's just below the surface of the water. And if you go anywhere near there in a boat, you're going to be done. You're going to sink, because no matter what, you're going to end up running into this coral. It's just, and they, you know, for years they didn't know how to avoid it, you know, because navigation once again. And there is a lot of, but see, the Spanish lost their whole armada, and there's all this gold. Remember when they lost their armada, and they're still finding the gold today? That was from a massive giant hurricane that they happened to go right into. And like, they lost 3,000 ships that were fucking full of gold. That's all still around there. They haven't found it. You know, once again, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. You got to know. I mean, have you ever been out in the ocean and you look out there? And it's like, okay, let's dig here. Okay, you know what I mean? Like, it is so vast and huge that you could spend a lifetime, if you didn't know where to look, and never find a fucking thing. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, it's so vast. It's so huge. It's so unforgiving. And so you go out in the ocean, it's easy to do it or whatever, but I've been out there, and you are at its mercy. You are in a world that is absolutely, positively there to kill you.
In the chat, we have a comment by Tony Macaroni, who says we should build a giant magnet and drag it across the ocean floor.
Yeah, the only problem is, what are you going to drag it with? You know?
That and you're only going to be able to pick up iron. You're not going to be able to pick up aluminum, things like that, other materials.
Right.
Yeah, you're better off with sonar, looking for anomalies, and then when you see a bump, then you send one of those little
ROV.
Yeah.
He also said, my advice is to only take a boat in the ocean if you're on a cruise. But I have issues with a cruise. Where are you going to go?
I don't want to get diarrhea.
They've had cruise ships that were 3 stories high, and they've had waves go over the top of those things.
I don't want to have a cruise ship
Imagine-
tip over because of a rogue wave. I could see that
You
happen.
know, could you imagine though being on like one of those 3 or 4 deck cruise ships, being on the top up there and having a wave that was taller than that wash you off of there? I mean, you're not going to
Or
survive.
chip you over
I mean,
upside down,
fall 4
like
stories,
Poseidon
you're not
Adventure.
gonna survive. If you fell off that 4th story, you're not going to survive when you hit the water. It's like falling off.
No, you're not. No, you're not going to. And have you noticed that a lot of the cruise ships now are built very narrow?
I haven't noticed, but
Really narrow and very tall.
I never really got into cruise ships. I don't know, like, because things happen out at sea. I mean, I don't know. I think if you wanted something, you know, I mean, like just looking at the ocean every day like that, I don't know. There's nothing to look at. There's nothing to look at. If you're fishing, it's totally different. You're looking, you know, fishing is a totally different thing or whatever. But, you know.
Tommy, what have you got to say about this?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't like it when things disappear without a trace. I don't like that. It's not logical. And again, I mean, there have been a lot of anomalies and a lot of strange things that have happened in both the Bermuda Triangle as well as the Dragon's Triangle. Things that are really hard to explain. Again, you know, these ships that turn up after, you know, many years and
That's
everything.
the thing. That's the thing right there.
Okay. And then, you know, basically they show up and everything is intact. I mean, the cargo holds full. They've got, you know, full supplies, but they got no people, you know, and again, like I was saying earlier,
right.
Like I was saying earlier, if, you know, if you're on a ship and you're in high water, you know, in like a squall or a storm or whatever, I just don't see the logic in abandoning a perfectly good ship to jump in a rowboat and try to face those waters that way. That doesn't make any sense to me. But the Flight 19 thing, and that's just one example of all kinds of navigational anomalies and things that happen out there in the Bermuda Triangle. And, you know, this is a known thing. And that's just another example of, you know, how could compasses on 5 different ships, or rather 5 different aircraft, how could they possibly malfunction? And even if they all did malfunction, again, these guys are, you know, they're trained navigators. They're naval aviators.
It's because of the electromagnetic wave frequencies, according to science. They're saying the electromagnetic waves in those areas, such as the Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle, and 10 other vile vortices on the planet, including the Nevada Triangle that VERN was talking about. They all have a higher rate, a higher designation of electromagnetic frequencies, which can cause interruption of electronics, messing
Right.
with
If you're at
radar.
night, how do you make a point of reference? If it's without using like dead reckoning with a star in a plane, you're not going to be able to do that. At boat,
Right.
you can maybe do it, but you're in pitch darkness. Try to do this. Go out in pitch darkness and try to know which way to go without a compass.
Yeah,
No
it
point of
would be
reference.
difficult at
No,
night.
no
Yeah.
point of reference. It's just flat water. Okay, so you're flying over the water and you have no point of reference. Which way's up? Which way's down? You know that. Which way's left or right? You don't know.
Right. So a lot of planes might crash that way. Yeah.
Oh, you run out of fuel. You're traveling on a trail. Oh, I'm going to go this way. I'm like, you're going 500 miles the wrong way. And once you realize you're going the wrong way, how do you get back? You're not going to get back. You're out of fuel. And these planes back then were prop planes. They didn't carry a lot of fuel. They barely fly from England to Europe and back. You know,
Well, let's talk about flight MH370 out of the Philippines, the one that disappeared a few years ago.
The one where they thought, well, I mean, there's that one that, are you talking about the one that
well, they said they found portions of a wing.
Airbus. Are you talking about the Airbus?
No, I'm talking about Flight 370. It was.
What kind of plane was it?
I want to say a 747.
I think so, yeah.
Because there was the Airbus that disappeared, but they think that the pilot had issues. No,
that wasn't it. It was a different one, and it was a Philippine airliner.
And when was this? How recent?
Not very recent. I would say how long? 5 years ago?
5, 6 years.
5, 6 years ago. Yeah. and there was a massive search, massive. United States Air Force, United States Navy, Coast Guard, other countries,
everybody.
And they were doing grid searches for like 3-4 months, and they found nothing, absolutely nothing.
Well, you know, if the plane broke up when it hit the water, it could be scattered with the currents. I mean, pieces could be all over every hell of creation. It just depends on how much is intact. If they, you know, it obviously crashed, but where, or it disappeared. One of two things: either it disappeared, which would be another whole thing or whatever, or it crashed. And if it crashed, or what speed did it crash at? I mean, you know, these planes are very
right.
They're not like 9/11. Okay, if they run into the water, they fucking come all apart and everything. I mean,
but they come apart when they hit the water. Even
if
with
they landed on the water carefully, they can make it. But if the guy is a madman and he fucking flew it right into the water straight head on, it could be broken up every which way. I mean, God knows.
Okay. If it's broken up every which way and the currents
should be wreckage somewhere showing up.
The currents disperse the wreckage, then there would be wreckage found.
Unless it went into a trench, like, you know, there's
like the Marianas Trench.
But there's always lighter pieces that are going to float to the surface, and there's kind of a lot of that on board an aircraft. I mean, the whole premise behind the aircraft is make it light as possible.
Flotation on their seats. The seats are made to be flotation devices, so the seats should float. Okay, I mean, unless it was intact and went down.
But there would also be fluid on top of the ocean too, like oil.
Or all
baggage
with something nefarious, like that someone knows. Someone knows what happened. It's nefarious, and that's the case. Either, like I said, disappeared or they crashed. But, you know, there's only two things that could have happened there.
Or it could be that they're not telling us the whole story.
Which is probably likely.
I mean, if that's the case, then that opens up a can of worms that's completely beyond anything that's phenomenal. You're talking about the way the state of affairs are with the governments that we have today in power. I mean,
I was just talking about fake news, but yeah. I'm saying,
I think that would happen, because if they did, then what did they do with the people, and stuff? Obviously, they can't let.
That's the thing. What did they do with the people? See, because the people were never. Now, this is what I got a question for you, Vern. If a plane hits the water going, say, I was in a 747 that was going 650 miles an hour. Okay. If that plane was traveling at 650 miles an hour and it hits the water, nose first, okay, would all the people on board be disintegrated? Gone?
That's a loaded question, because, see, it depends on if you get thrown clear of the wreck, and how you hit. I would say that most of the people, if not all of them, would be pretty broken up, because, see, the problem is you have, when you stop something going that fast on a dime, the human body comes apart internally. It destroys your body. The G forces, the negative G's, stuff like that, would more than likely kill you. Now, if you could be thrown clear of it and slow down at a different rate. See, there's okay. Let me cite an example. The SR-71 one time, one of them broke up over Nevada, and there was two pilots. One pilot survived, the other one didn't. The navigator didn't. The pilot did, and he came out of there at Mach 2 something or whatever, and it broke like his arm, his leg, all that stuff. The sheer force of the wind and all that. He's really a miracle that he survived. And he didn't even think he survived, because the funny thing was that he was completely knocked out, and he was floating down, and he came to, and he looked around, and he goes, I guess I'm in heaven, or something, because he knew he really didn't think he was going to survive when he ejected. That was our only hope. Now, the navigator who ejected just a millisecond after him or before him was completely he was dead. When he hit the ground and stuff, he didn't make it. But the damage that this he both of his eyes were filled with blood. His ears were bleeding. I mean, the amount of damage that he went through, and he was wearing a freaking helmet. He was wearing a flight suit. He was in an ejection seat. And all those factors, led to why he survived. But you don't have those in an airline plane. Those seats are just rickety, And you know what I'm saying? And when that
Right.
plane hits, everybody's going to go
Right.
slamming, but those seats are going to break out, and they're going to be everyone's going to be dead. And then
Right.
if
I
you're
understand
not
everybody
you're
dead.
going to drown. You're in the water, you're going to drown. So then you have two different dynamics. You have the initial trauma, and then you have the drowning. You can drown in water. You know, that's the thing about
Right.
people don't understand when like the racing boats and stuff, how dangerous it is, because like it's different than being on land. Because when you're on land, when you crash, you're not worrying about whether you're going to breathe or not. You know, when you're knocked out. When you're knocked out, you don't know that you're knocked out or whatever. You don't know that you're not breathing. You're dead in the water. You know what I'm saying? So.
But why I was asking is if a plane hits the water in the nighttime and it's going that fast and the people are killed, wouldn't there still be body parts floating on top of the ocean?
I can't answer that because there's also animals out there that things, you know, and stuff. And I
Yeah,
don't know.
tiger sharks.
You
Yeah.
got luggage and things like that. I mean, you would think there'd be a debris field.
But maybe the stuff washed up into a place that nobody looked. I mean, it's a big planet, okay? And there's islands out there that you can't go near because the natives on there will kill you. And maybe and it was in that area. Maybe their wreckage went up on one of those islands that are off limit islands, and they never saw it. I just don't have any answers because I wasn't involved in the search for that. I don't know the real details, and they don't tell us the truth. Okay, I mean, let's face it, they don't fucking tell us everything, and they don't want us to know the horrors. Maybe there was something so horrible that they don't want people to know about it. They don't want somebody to
Right.
know.
I understand that.
You know, they're investigating something that's even bigger or whatever, and it takes years sometimes to like bring this shit down. When you're talking about somebody taking out an aircraft like that, that's a state or whatever. It takes them years to get that all fucking shit worked out. You know what I mean? It does.
Right. That's why I'm talking about what would happen to people when the plane hits the water, because the point is where are the people from Flight 19?
Well, you know, the whole thing is that the plane, if it was flown at that kind of a rate or whatever, it's gonna break it up to such a point. It's like a meat grinder, okay? And then you have like ocean currents, you have animals, you have all kinds of stuff, places where stuff can get caught. Who knows? The ocean is a very dynamic place, and it's different everywhere you go. The currents can carry stuff like what went on in Japan, you know, with the tsunamis and all that stuff. Those within 2 weeks, they had cars washing ashore in Oregon. Cars all the way from Japan in 2 weeks. Okay, so that's a long ways to go. I mean, it went all the way around Alaska and all that and washed up. But like you said, it did wash up. But God knows, okay, down there, the currents, I don't know how the currents are. They could end up in Antarctica. One day they could go down and say, look, here's the planet.
Well, that's one suggestion I propose for like ships missing in the Dragon's Triangle, that if they went down, the currents took them somewhere else.
Yeah, the currents could hold them underwater for a month, and then they quit searching, and all of a sudden the stuff starts surfacing, and people don't or forget about it. And they're like, oh yeah, where'd you get the seat? Well, a year later or whatever, you know, I found it out in the water. This is the seat from the aircraft if they were looking, but who knows? Yeah, how far they follow up. I don't know if they continue to keep looking or if they just abandon it and move on.
Then I have one other question for you. Do you think that the Bermuda Triangle or the Dragon's Triangle have any paranormal or supernatural
the
things associated with
Triangle definitely has a lore to it that goes back like to the time when the Japanese were in their feudal times and stuff. I mean, there's like Tommy mentioned something that I remember. There was like a ship that turned up, and this is like no bullshit. It turned up there that was from 200 years before or something like that, and it was like a ghost ship, and it was perfectly intact. And this is where the legend or whatever, they said that the food was still on the tables, and that it was still edible. Okay, so what happened? What happened to those people? And what happened to that ship? And how did it end up there now? And any ship that's been out there for 30 and 40 years, and this happens quite a bit, churns up out of nowhere. First of all, you'd say it's pirates, but then no, it wasn't pirates because it's 30 years ago. And if it was pirates or whatever, how is it still intact? It's been through, fucking storms and shit like that. There's some little storms down there, dude.
The
And
Celeste,
it doesn't turn into waves on its own either.
right? The Celeste was actually a wooden ship. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
wooden sailing ship, and for that thing, for anything like that to be unguided, uncaptained, let's
100,
say,
almost 200 years, was it 180 something years or whatever?
yeah, and over it, all the storms and every other kind of catastrophic thing that happens on the ocean, and this thing is still intact. I mean,
What was their last? Where did they go from? I remember there was like it disappeared. They were on a routine short little haul they were supposed to go on when they disappeared, right?
they had some kind of cargo that they were hauling, and it was his captain and his family that I don't know how many. And then there were, of course, several crew members. And then when the ship did turn up, somebody's military boarded it. It might have even been us, but somebody boarded that ship and they found it. It was completely intact. I mean, the sails were a little torn up. The ones that were down, that weren't, that were unfurled.
Such a period of time that you would expect it. I mean, God knows how it was out there.
There's a tale that, and this has been around forever. I can remember this as a child, that they found the ship and there was actually gold cargo on board. But before they could get the gold off of it, somehow or another, it turned and it faded into some kind of weird fog bank. And that's been around forever.
Yeah, and disappeared into the fog bank.
Yeah, it could be lore,
a movie was made about it.
Yeah, there was another one. There was a ship that would appear and disappear all the time. I think it was like in back east, just like that. It was a true like ghost ship in which they could still hear the people on deck, and it was a clipper ship. It was like an old ship, and people have seen it. They like
right. I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I can't remember the name of it, which ship it is. They think it is, but it was lost out at sea. Never seen again. And it was a clipper ship. I think it carried booze back in the day, like whiskey or something.
That might have been a paranormal event.
And it has appeared and disappeared in an area or whatever where, like I said, it's more than just like illusion type scene or whatever. They actually hear people on there.
Hear it, see it, and it's actually breaking water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's an old ship, you know what I mean? It's like
right.
Doesn't belong.
I've actually seen a clipper ship up close because there's those clipper ships that are remakes.
Yeah.
Well, they've actually the Constitution is the original ship. It did burn, but it is the original ship too.
Well, I haven't seen the U.S. Constitution. I've
seen a lot of renovation work on it. It's in Boston Harbor, I believe.
I haven't seen that one. I've seen a couple that came up the Mississippi, believe it or not.
It's the oldest continuous ship in the U.S. Navy. It's still a commissioned ship in the U.S. Navy.
Wow, that's awesome.
Old Ironsides.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is there have been UFO sightings, there have been USO sightings, there have been paranormal sightings, and there have been creepy fogs, weird weather. Now, there is a theory that some of the weird weather in the Dragon's Triangle, the one near Japan, is being caused because it's very close to the Marianas Trench.
There's been talk about that it has a lot of volcanic activity, and it does in that area.
Right.
A lot of
it's near the I know what
it gases,
is.
you have something you don't think about, but a toxic gas can come up off the bottom, and everybody's like, ah, and they run off the ship and jump, thinking that, you can't breathe, you're dying or whatever, you've been poisoned.
Yeah, that's possible.
It doesn't happen, I mean,
but what about the people down below?
They were down below and the gas came down. They went and they were like, it could have been like an acid where you got on your skin and you had to jump in the water because you're on fire, you're burning. I mean,
it would have to be something that we've never heard of or seen before.
Right. Yeah. I suggested that earlier in my stream. I said maybe the water turns to some type of acidity, acid, and dissolves the organic matter.
The air, or maybe. I mean, I don't know what would possess somebody to want to jump off a boat in the middle of the ocean into the water, because knowing what's in the water waiting for you. You know what I mean? It's like
your chance of survival goes to almost zero as soon as you leave the ship.
Exactly. And when you get in a rowboat or whatever, and you're like,
right.
If you've ever been, like I said, out in the ocean, if you've ever been seasick, and I've been seasick, it just doesn't matter anymore. Either you get on land or you don't even care. I mean, you can be thrown overboard, you don't even care because you're so sick. It just doesn't matter, And if you're like in that state, I mean, what do you do? Like, I mean, if you get flipped overboard or whatever, you're done. You're done.
And the temperature of the water is going to kill you too.
Sure.
Yeah. If that doesn't, then the thing, if it's warm water, then you have tiger sharks. So
there had to be something serious go on there for them to abandon a perfectly good ship. I mean, there had to be something really, really serious, something that would scare them off of that ship, or
either they were forced off because of piracy type thing, and then something happened with the pirates, or they were scared off of it, or forced off of it because of some environmental possible. I mean, there's several different possibilities, but whatever the case is, they need to try to figure out what it was.